On behalf of the Centenary Committee, I want to welcome you all to Oscar Square for this simple ceremony to mark the beginning of what we hope will be a series of events to mark the centenary of the building of the Fairbrother Fields housing scheme. This single magnolia tree is being planted in remembrance of all those who have been born and lived in the Tenters.
And in again.
Woo!
Now next.
Stella has been living here for 87 years, born in the square.
Not in the park though.
Not in the park, no.
Now look.
Sean has only been here 67 years, only a child.
And we have Alice.
Bessie. I'm only over there. And I'm only over there.
Mom's grandfather moved in to a brand new house in 1922, and Mom's still in the same house.
I see history everywhere. So when I'm walking down the street, I don't just see the street. I want to know, why is it called what it is? Why is there a bend in the road at that point? Why are the bricks different colours? Why has that house got a granite windowsill and the other one doesn't? I want to know the layers of history that got us to here. We're talking today about the Tenters, or to give it its proper name, the Fairbrother Fields estate, which was developed exactly 100 years ago this year.
Oh, it is Fairbrothers Field. My husband wouldn't brought, and that's only Fairbrothers Field. So it is Fairbrothers Field. That's what it was known as, because it was all fields.
My wife calls it Fairbrother Fields. I call it the Tenters. It's more the area.
The Tenter Fields were the area used by the French Huguenot people who came to live in this area. They were invited over by the Duke of Ormond. Mostly they were weavers or connected with the weaving industry.
But Tenter Fields comes from the practice of stringing out linen cloth between large wooden frames on tenter hooks. And of course that's where the name comes from today. The scheme is now affectionately known as the Tenters.
Tenter's housing scheme is particularly important to us, Dublin City Council, because it's one of the first residential schemes for tenant purchase in the new state in the 1920s.
I suppose you have to go back maybe into the middle of the 19th century to get a real sense of it. You have a huge housing problem developing in the city from the middle of the 19th century. It's caused by lots of different factors, but there's a realisation that housing is the manifestation of all kinds of what we now call public health problems.
Dublin had a record within the British Empire that was the envy of none. It had the worst housing conditions of anywhere within the British Empire. Basic sanitation was non-existent.
In 1914, Dublin Corporation carried out a housing inquiry, really following the collapse of a tenement house on Church Street the previous year, where sadly 7 people lost their lives.
On that occasion, the buildings literally collapsed like a deck of cards. The mortality rate would have been much higher, only for the fact that there was an event on in the nearby Father Matthew Hall that day, and quite a number of people were at the event. And that is what focuses the minds. Something has to be done to solve this problem. And that's where our Alderman Tom Kelly, he's appointed as chairperson of the Housing Committee for Dublin Corporation, as they were called then. And he hits the ground running. We so need a Tom Kelly today. We're talking about the worst time in Irish history to be building anything. We have a war raging on the continent, World War I. A lot of our male workforce are there, they're at the front. There's shortages because of World War I. We've had the 1916 Rising, so every penny available in this city is diverted to rebuilding the city centre. And yet Kelly wants to build houses.
I found a plan, I think the first one that was submitted to the Housing Committee, and it's very, very different to what they ended up building. It was very rigid, barrack style. There was a lot of flats with some houses.
The Tenters housing scheme was redesigned in around 1917 to follow the ideals of the Garden City movement. We saw a reduction in the density of housing, so a significant reduction in the amount of housing that would be provided, so that would allow for open space for homeowners to enjoy.
The design of the housing scheme was very much heavily influenced by the Garden City movement in Britain at the time, where clusters of housing was designed around open spaces, green open spaces, and each house had a front and a back garden. This would have had a huge impact on the character of the area, the spaces between the buildings, the green spaces, and everything started to breathe more because of this change in density.
It starts around 1921, and at that stage we're still under British rule. So this is the last estate to be built with money from Britain. But we move into the Free State almost immediately. So January 1922, we're in the Irish Free State. So the Tenters reflects the new beginning, the very beginning of a brand new country trying to find its way in the world, but using the last of the British money that was there in order to build the houses.
It's pretty special, it's very decorative. It's when you look at it in close detail that you see how carefully considered the architecture was. Each house is slightly different. It's defined by beautiful boundaries, beautiful doors and stained glass. It was also the first time that cul-de-sacs appeared in Ireland.
It's architecture at its best. You don't have to be a conservation expert to enjoy or really to appreciate the fantastic detailing that the city architects at the time developed in their scheme. You know, look at the roofs. You have this variety in the roofs. You think a roof is a roof, but really you've got your standard pitched roof, you've got a hipped roof, you've also got then these lovely gablets. You have your slate roofs with their standard coursing, but you also have then, you know, an asphalt roof tile, which is some red, some with a deep blue, and these diamond patterns. And then the chimney stacks. Again, you might think chimney stack, what's in a chimney stack? But they really have lovely little brick detailing. You have this blue vitrified, deep blue vitrified brick, really wonderful colour, and then of course the red brick as well. You have wonderful wall treatments. You've got this rough textured render. In some cases you have the lower section all in brick. This Dolphin's Barn golden brick, so synonymous with this area, or sometimes red brick. In other areas you have simple brick detailing running along a string course or a sill line. The vents are great. Sometimes a little round-headed vent, and in other cases they have a little timber louvered. They're really fantastic, beautiful little details. There's some very simple railings, and then you get lovely wee gates with their little arches on them. And all these things, you mightn't think about it, but in reality when you're walking around, they really add to a variety that sort of just makes a sense of enjoyment as you're walking around. And you've got the sash windows with these really long little sash horns, which I just love, and that's a bit of a nerdy thing. Some of the buildings have tripartite windows. We've got 3 distinct windows. In other cases you have one large window, but the sash itself has been divided into 3, what we refer to as a Wyatt window. There's a few elements of stained glass as well. You can see some stained glass windows, particularly in porch windows. The house forms themselves, I think one of my favourite ones, you know, standing in Oscar Square and looking across at the gable-ended buildings, which have been really designed in the form of a pediment, and they have these what we call a dentiled frieze on them. So if you look closely, you'll see they look like little teeth. So you've got all these little teeth running up and down the raking line of the pediment itself. It really, you know, you're looking back. This is looking to, you know, the Parthenon, you know, this is all based on neoclassical architecture, you know, so there's the aspirations of the architects. This was a housing scheme for the general public, but there was a real aspiration to provide good quality architecture, and it was all based on this neoclassical design. It would have been a lot cheaper for the architects just to provide the same house over and over and over and over again, but no, they went to the effort of designing these variations and ranges which really spoke to the Garden City movement. The other crucial element, I suppose, about the Tenters is the fact that it was the first tenant purchase scheme in the country. And that's phenomenal, really. I mean, a homeowner who had lived in a slum or a tenement had the opportunity to buy their own house. It's within your grasp. So instead of, you know, paying your rent to Dublin Corporation, the homeowners would come down every week and they'd be able to pay an instalment on their house, which meant that within a period of time, they would actually own their own house.
There was a row early on, and accusations that members of the Housing Committee were using their influence to allocate houses to their favoured constituents. And it led to a public inquiry, to what can only be described as robust and full and frank discussions within the council chamber, which led ultimately to a scheme for allocating these annuities on the basis of need as measurable.
You applied for a house, so there was an application list opened up. It also meant you had to have a job to be here. So we got our local artisans, all our skilled craftsmen. It was jokingly said through the years that if you wanted to get a house built, you only knocked on 4 doors in the tenters and you got everything you needed, from the builder to the plumber to the electrician to the painter. They were all living here.
The Tenters was a great place to grow up. I just remember going out of the house and coming back when I was hungry or when it was getting dark. In 1922, my great-grandfather got the chance to apply for one of the houses, and he was successful. He would never been on the property ladder. He was a Dublin corporation labourer, and he was renting, and they were in a tenement over the north side of Dublin. That was completely life-changing for them and their children. Who would have thought in a million years, living in Gloucester Street or Mountjoy Square or any of the tenements around, who in their right mind would have thought that one day they would have a house in Fairbrother's Fields, 3 bedrooms and a parlour? It must have been like winning the lotto, literally like winning the lotto. Yeah.
One of the great characters on every Friday was the fishwoman, who came up the hill here pushing her basket, wheeled basket, and calling out at the top of her voice, "Nice fresh fish! Nice cod and fresh fish!" And the women be all waiting for that nice fresh fish. She also stopped up around the school, and one of the brothers there heard her, and he stopped the class, whatever they were doing, said, "Hold on, listen to that woman's song. Now, can you get the notes right? Da, da, da." Yeah, you had the whole class doing da, 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 and it was kind of fa, fa, me, fa, fa, me. And she became known as Fa, Fa, Me.
You surely can. Would you like some questions and clues to help you on your trail?
This road is named after an antiquarian and expert of medieval Irish literature, but you might think he was an Indian dish with an Irish twist.
O'Curry Road.
O'Curry Road, got it. Oh, wait, that's another. Thank you. Thank you.
In my 40s, I went back into adult education just to study Irish genealogy in UCD. All of the books that I had to study, all of the works that I had to study were like names of roads where I had grown up in and I'd never thought about. So I had to study O'Curry, Geoffrey Keating, O'Donovan, Petrie.
The message behind the naming of the roads, and this was Tom Kelly's thinking, it was to send a message to the Irish Free State. We are having a new beginning. We're leaving our revolutionary past behind, and we're going to commemorate values of the Irish nation. So the roads are called after all our great Celtic scholars and writers, researchers. O'Donovan, for example, my hero, the place name man of Ireland. Petrie, O'Curry. These are the Irish scholars and writers who provided us with our history, a state beginning to build its history again. We lost so much in the Civil War, when we lost the Public Records Office. We have to rebuild our history. There are 2 exceptions. So one of them is Oscar Square. That's not Oscar Wilde, it's Oscar, son of Oisin, from the Fianna mythology. And St. Thomas's Road, the beautiful boulevard that goes right through the middle of the estate, because this area is the area of Donore, part of the Abbey of St. Thomas and the Liberty of St. Thomas Court and Donore.
In building Fairbrother's Fields, Dublin City Council had to consider a problem which they had faced in pretty well every other scheme up to that point. Do we build what people can afford? Now, if we build what people can afford, we may well end up building slums. Or do we build the kind of housing which we think people should have? And that is one of the great contributions I think that Fairbrother Fields makes to this debate, because they go clearly for the idea of building a high design, well organised, well managed community. It's not just a housing estate, it's a community. The whole design values are designed to ensure that it works that way.
1953, we got married. First and foremost, the people. You can't beat them again, they're great, because most of them came from the inner city. They all came from Thomas Street, Breedford Street, Bridge Street, that area, between Francis Street.
Oh, the days of the Terry dancing, oh, the ring of the piper's tune, oh, for one of those hours.
It is not a perfect solution. It didn't deal with the problems of the very poor, but at least it set a principle that you should build high quality and worry about the cost another time.
Good design endures. Consideration for how people want to live in their homes, giving them plenty of space and giving people a chance to become part of a very vibrant community will always endure.
Sometimes these early 20th century developments aren't as appreciated as they should be. We look at the 19th century buildings that the Tenters sits within, and I think everybody appreciates that those red brick houses are of value, but I don't think people maybe think too much about the Tenters themselves and the architecture from the early part of the century. I think it's worth people stopping for a moment, looking at their buildings, looking and seeing what actually brings a smile to their face, and to see that the buildings in the Tenters are just as valuable as the architecture from the Georgian and Victorian period, and has a place really in our architectural heritage.
I wish people could see inside my head because I've lived all my life here and still living here. I have swung from the lampposts that have been cast in that Hammond foundry right beside the forecourts. So what I would like is for people to see all those little details and really, really fight to keep them. But just look at what you have and try and keep those little details to identify the houses for what they were. Look, I'm the person that you can see the back end of sticking out of skips. When anybody is doing something around the Tenters area and there's a skip outside, I'm in there looking for bricks that have the inset that says Dolphin's Barn Brick, because I'm proud of that. Please don't throw out those lovely items into skips. It's not rubbish. They're worth their weight in gold. It's our history. It's our story.
We don't expect people to live in a museum, We know that people have to live in these houses. They have to be fit for modern purpose. If you want to do an extension to your house, maybe look at it in a very sympathetic way. Look at it in, is this going to be overbearing? How does it affect the proportions of the building? Look at the materials that you use. Those are kind of little things that everyone can think about when they're looking at modifying their building.
We would always encourage people to come contact us in the conservation section in Dublin City Council if they have any queries at all about anything they want to do to their home. Please do come in to us and we will help you in any way that we can.
To me, it hasn't changed because it's still the same. Nice people.
Nice cod and fresh fish.